So this is going to be my first video of just speaking of the word enlightenment. What does that truly mean? It says in the book I read, the Buddha says enlightenment is the end of suffering, but what comes after the end of suffering? Because as a human, what we really do is we avoid pain and we seek pleasure, but every addiction starts with pain and it ends in pain. See, every addiction stops working at some point. What the world fails to realize about addiction is I really don't believe it's a disease, because how could you get done with a disease? That's permanent. You're gonna die. You can't just get done with a disease. That's just my own motive of my own prerogative. You really can't get done. So what the world fails to realize with addiction is just the simple fact. The reason the addict loses the power of choice is because they don't know any other way. And it's really that simple. And it really is that simple. We lose the power to choose because we don't know another way. So to not know another way, we don't have a choice but to keep doing the only way we know. As I scroll through Facebook, to see people just this stupid ass news headlines, people just smoking clear outside behind trees, and they're just like, oh my god, we gotta send them to rehab, I'm sorry, but I get a little sassy, because rehab never saved my life. I was truly hopeless. I had to come to believe in the hopelessness and futility, not just unmanageable but mental purgatory, because the pain that the drug that I consumed for a long time in my life, the mental purgatory was much greater than the pain of living on the streets or the pain of the cold or whatever it may have been. What went on up here was much greater than what went on around here, because we can not lose everything but give everything away in our mental realm just as much as physical realm, because we didn't lose anything in our addiction, we gave it away. And so we could truly concede to our innermost selves, that we are a chronic drug addict, but until I had to come to believe in a power greater than not just myself, because the drugs are definitely a power greater than me. Enlightenment, everybody in the world has enlightenment. They do, but their minds are making too much noise. So the first step to enlightenment is to simply ask God to reign His peace over your mind. It is truly that simple. But most people won't do that simple thing because they are not hopeless. They're just used to being miserable. I go outside in a spiritual awakening, a spiritual experience, because I live in one 24/7, from having so many, from reading that book to having two over the weekend that I will soon make a story about. But I walk around outside. The whole freaking world is trying too hard. And that's the thing, everybody is trying. The greater the mind tries to do anything, the harder it's going to be to accomplish that thing. But with being in enlightenment, and as I said, that first step is ask God to reign His peace over your mind. And if done successfully, your mind will be quiet. And then the step 2 is to not just do that, but to surrender your own mind and consciousness to God. Because for me to build that conscious contact that I have, and I don't give a shit if nobody believes the fact that God speaks to me every day, no matter what it may be. God, how can I best help this person? God, what should I do next? What? He spoke to me in meditation before I recorded this video. Trent, please go record a video about enlightenment. He's the one who asked me to open up the big book not that long ago. And anytime he tells me, Trent, my will for you is to read into action, working with others. It all lines up perfectly, because last night I could not sleep. The reason I could not sleep is because God didn't want me to, so I could walk into the bathroom and see that. But from being in true enlightenment is also a form of being recovered. Because when you can have your mind constantly quiet, you're not thinking anymore. And if you have to think, you have to make decisions, it's quiet. You're carefully making those decisions. You're carefully making those decisions, carefully reviewing, what I truly believe is God's will for you is to find your own will for you. I don't care what nobody thinks. I know what I hear. I know what I hear every day. I do. Because nobody knows my pain better than me. And it's always going to be that way. And nobody knows how I got out of that pain better than me. And it's always going to be that way. Because the greater the mind, as I said, tries to do anything, whether that's, I got to be successful, the idea is to change your thinking. And that's something that only comes from a power greater than your thinking. And it really is that simple. Because the greater the mind tries to find peace, the harder it's going to be to find that peace, because that's all the mind thinks about. As I've learned, the greater the mind tries to fight off the pain, the greater the pain is going to become. So when you have pain in your mind, you just simply let it sit there. And don't try to fight it off, because you're just going to sit there like, just fucking looking like Popeye type shit, and you're trying to fucking fight it off. It ain't gonna go anywhere. It's just gonna get worse, and you might end up doing that over it, if you're anything like me, until I could become saved. So how did I improve that conscious contact every day? Was by becoming what I call an actual prayer rapper. I pray. And I don't pray for a million. I don't pray for money. I don't pray for sex. I don't pray for women. I don't pray for none of that shit. I pray for other people, and I may have prayed for you to get the same enlightenment peace I have. And if you have it, you would know. Because I call it the gleam of Jesus Christ, because it is a gleam in your heart of being saved. To be recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body, but not just mind consciousness. Because my consciousness had been warped over many years. My psychosis my brain became so fried, and this is a little bit of a, and I will always talk about the problem, but I will always turn it into solution. Absolutely. And what people fail to realize is they can look at my post and be like, man, he's prideful, he's full of himself, but they're actually wrong. I'm a very loving, caring person that I have truly become by nothing more than Jesus Christ and the way of life in the big book. You know what I mean? And it's that simple. Those are the only two things that I truly need to be happy. Because in order to be happy, something has to be happening. But if you're happy, something is already happening. So if you're happy, something is happening. So if you're always happy, then something's always happening, so you're always happy. And it's just like that. But as I said, the thing about something like methamphetamine and sleep deprivation is it rots brain cells. Sleep deprivation rots brain cells mixed with meth. You're rotting brain cells, rotting dopamine, so your brain needs both of those things to, and believe me, this does not trigger me one bit. Not in any way. Not at all. Because I'm done. And by God's grace, I am done. By God's grace, in the life in the big book, I am done. And because I could never be done. Because I didn't know any other way. But that is solution right there, what I just told you. So, you lose brain cells and dopamine, your brain can't survive. It can't process anything, which is actually what creates the psychosis and the hallucinations that I had spent years of my life really just hallucinating every single day. That became all I knew was psychosis. And I still live in a form of psychosis today. You know, I have a paranoid schizophrenia disorder from using meth, and I don't give a shit. I mean, I don't care what a doctor would say. I have permanently damaged my brain. You know, but I'm being restored to sanity by God's grace, Jesus' grace. If you get what I'm saying, then you do. And everybody's enlightened. Everybody has enlightenment, but your mind is making too much noise. I just told you the first 2 steps. God, please reign your peace over my mind. God, in this breath, I praise you in your precious, holy, mighty name, that if I may surrender my brain and my own consciousness to you and my own thought patterns to you, I surrender my consciousness to you and my thought patterns, that you may allow my brain to cease fighting everything and everyone, and to never try too hard for the answers, always come in a clear conscience. But what does that really mean? Never to try too hard, right? So you're not trying anymore in life. Because as I said, the greater the mind tries to do anything, the more unsuccessful you're going to be. Because success comes, everybody's doing the best they can in every moment, every breath. Doesn't matter who you are, what you've done. You've always done the best you could. Ever. You know, but in a clear conscience, if you do what I did, and maybe if people are interested in having a conscious contact with God like I do, I'll keep doing this, you know, and I will write it. But I just told you the first 2 steps, right? The first 2 steps. Go back and do it and write it down. If you really want what I have and what a good friend of mine has too, then you got to do what we suggest. Because if you want to stay miserable, you know, because life's meant to be lived happy. You're meant to be at joy. You're meant to be at peace. You're meant to be enlightened. You're meant to feel the way I feel 24/7. But your mind is making too much noise, and I just gave you the first 2 steps on how to do that. You know, meaning makers don't always make it, because the only meaning makers that make it are not real alcoholics. And I don't give a shit what you think. They're not. The book talks about the difference between a heavy drinker and a real alcoholic. The hard drinker may have some continuous course of it, maybe even have some health problems, some family problems, but they have the power to choose to stop or not. They can go to meetings and stop because they have the power to choose, because they, quite frankly, they know another way, because their brains don't have not just a disease, but I call it a parasite, that only a power greater than alcohol can relieve you of and me of. So meaning makers don't always make it. I came to AA for my drinking, I stayed for my thinking, you know. I don't agree with that either. I go to AA now. It impacts my thinking in a bad way. Because people talk about God like he's somehow, no, he's not. He's Jesus. You know, I find that disrespectful. Because you've read it all over my stories. You know that Jesus saved my life. And someday I will make a video about just that sentence. Jesus saved my life. You know, but I'm telling you the first 2 steps. God, please reign your peace over my mind. I just told you a prayer as well. So if you truly want what I have, you'll do those first 2 steps. And you'll allow me to be your spiritual teacher. And some people may be like, man, this guy's freaking prideful, he's full. No, he's not. He's a very loving and caring person, because I pray for other people. And you might be somebody that I prayed for to get that gleam of peace. But the only way you're going to get it is if you have faith in God. Because God only answers prayers. And I know this because he told me he only answers prayers if you have faith. He's going to answer them. And if you surrender to him inside of those prayers. So faith and surrender, without faith and surrender, my own work, my own life is dead. I'm dead without that. Because if I fail to continue to enlarge my spiritual life and make videos like this, I will die. I will go back out and die. Because I'm a serious addict. I'm permanently damaged here, I'm permanently damaged here, here. You know what I mean? My teeth may fall out of my head someday. That happened to my Uncle Marty. But I brush them, but this is beside the point. You know what I mean? That's besides the point. So, your mind can be your best friend or it can be your worst enemy, absolutely. My mind is my best friend today. And I just really gave you a whole freaking rundown of how that's possible. Enlightenment equals mind quiet 24/7, body at peace, calm, relaxed, never stressed or worried about anything, because everything is just as it is meant to be. And if things were meant to be different, they would be. So if you can truly grasp that simple fact and really believe that, but if you can't, you're just gonna stay miserable. And this is not pride, this is, if you really were around me and if you really knew, I am just like my mother in a lot of ways. Absolutely. But I do have a mom today, and she knows who she is. I love you to all the planets and back. I pass.